So with that in mind, we're going to go ahead and get started talking about the role of the screen lead and what those responsibilities are. So this has not traditionally been the most formal process. So there's kind of description in the handbook of what screen leads do. But in all honesty, I don't think it's all that practically based of what folks actually should be doing. So I would like to explore some of that with you. So this is kind of the last of the major stuff that we're going to be discussing today. So one of the major components for screen leads, well, first of all, there should be one assigned screen lead at each agency, okay? So each of your agencies should have somebody. There's a lot of different ways in which you can figure out who the screen lead is. Most often, it's the person, the screener who's got the most experience under their belt in using the screen so that they can work with newer screeners. But it can be, a supervisor is assigned, and then the screeners train them, and then they eventually really take on the lead role. But really, it's about being that person that folks can come to and ask questions and figure out how to get into the training and what the heck's a WAMS ID and all that kind of stuff. So, like I said, usually it's the person who has the most experience in administering the screen, but not always. So, maintenance of an accurate, complete, and up-to-date list of all agency staff who perform functional screens is one of the most critical components of being the screen lead. So activation of new screeners, so that whole process we just talked through a little bit. And in my world, more importantly, is deactivation of screeners. So to activate new screeners, you provide the new person information on the web-based training, how to access that WAMS ID, the security form authorized, signed by an authorized person at the agency. That all gets faxed into the DHS SOS help desk. And all that contact information is right in the PowerPoint later on. The other thing in terms of new screeners is working on some kind of mentoring process where there's, practice ones done, there's observation where they watch a more experienced screener, review of the person's screens once they're doing them on their own, developing some feedback loops, all of that. So that is in here, but it's really important because, as we all know, it's not as black and white as it could be for being a functional screen. There's a lot of nuances. There's a lot of little things to think about and how you're addressing them. So having a person who can really walk through that with a new screener will really help that agency inter-rater reliability so that, I know my results are probably going to be very, very close to Tamara's, right? It might not be exactly the same, but it's going to be pretty darn close. So some mentoring of those new screeners is a huge piece. Deactivation. I really struggle with this one because it's something that agencies have not historically done very well, and there have been consequences to that. So if a screener leaves the agency, they find a new job, happy-go-lucky, moving on with life, or if they change roles and they no longer have a business purpose for accessing this level of information on consumers, they should be deactivated within 3 days. Okay? If a screener is terminated from your agency, if somebody gets fired, they need to be deactivated the same day, period. I think that some folks haven't always thought that through very well. So we have no way of knowing who's employed at your agency. We have no idea of knowing that Bonnie or Phil got fired for cause and they're really angry at your agency and they're walking out the door and you haven't deactivated them. They can get into your functional screen information access system and really goof stuff up. Never mind the fact that functional screens are covered by HIPAA. So there theoretically could be a significant data breach. If you do not remove access from somebody, they can go to the local library and pull up that information, and you might have a huge data breach on your hands. When that happens, as we've all read the newspaper articles over the years, there can be huge fines associated with that. Never mind the personal cost of somebody's information going out to places they don't want it. And that's kind of our responsibility to make sure that that's not happening to people's very, very sensitive personal information. So it is an access issue. It's a HIPAA violation. They can, and let's not forget, too, that it includes Social Security numbers. So even if they're not messing with your agency, if they have a nefarious streak, they have people's dates of birth, full names, and Social Security numbers, and could do significant damage to your agency if they sold that list to somebody. I don't know how that all works, but I know it's a problem. But all the identity thief kind of stuff could really come into play this. So I really want to ask that you keep up on this particular thing, because there's a lot of potentially bad consequences to it. And it can damage the agency reputation as well. So you guys are the screen leads. I am the screen liaison. So that is part of my many titles I have hanging around my neck some days. So I'm the screen liaison. So my job is to provide customer support to my customers, which is you guys. So the county folks and the contracted agencies. So anytime you have any questions or concerns regarding the screen, how to answer a question, a complex situation, clinical or otherwise, please contact me via phone or email, and we can talk through it. And if it's more complex and clinical than I can handle, I have nurses at the beck and call. We have a psychiatrist I can consult with. We have data experts. We have lots and lots of folks, HIPAA experts, all of those people, all within the Division of Mental Health and Substance Abuse Services. So I can run from cube to cube and get the right information so that you have the right information. So, and there's no reason why other screeners, I mean, this is kind of dependent on how you set things up at your agency, they can call me directly too. That's okay. That's absolutely fine. Now, I'm very difficult to reach, quite frankly. I travel a lot, but I do have a cell phone. I do have email that I check way too often and try to answer questions as they come up. So communication with me, and then my communication with other experts at DHS level, including the other screens. So accessing the children's long-term support screen people who've been doing this for a very long time, the long-term care adult screen, seeing how things kind of interact and what we need to be aware of and all of that. So we all try to work together. So if anybody needs additional guidance or clarification on instructions, so you have something come up, you go to your handbook, it's a little vague or it seems outdated and you're not sure if that's still the way things are being done, please contact me. Let's work through it. This is the number one call that I get, is when a completed screen leads to unexpected results. So you know, because of your clinical expertise, that this person should be screening yes for CCS, right? You know that because you've been doing these types of services for a long time. Call me. Because what I can do is pull up that person's screen and literally go through it with the screener and ask questions and challenge them on something, or ask them to think about things a little differently, all that kind of stuff. So it doesn't always work, though. And usually it's been for a really good reason. So if somebody has been in a program for a really, really long time and they've done amazingly well, they're no longer functionally eligible because they've moved past that place. And talking through that and what it looks like. I will say that if somebody comes up with that negative result in terms of CCS and it's somebody in your program, you do not need to discharge them that day. Let's look at it, let's work through it, let's gain some of that conversation. Let's talk to the consumer. What would they like? They very well might not need that level of care anymore, right? I'll own this, tend to cling to people that I know and I'm comfortable with, and it's really hard to consider not being involved with them anymore sometimes. But people get better, we know that. People get better and they move beyond our services. So allowing that to happen and then building in a really good transition plan, allowing some time for that. Do not discharge them the minute that it comes up negative for your program, but work through that process, okay? And like I said earlier, and it bears repeating, the number one reason that somebody has an unexpected negative result on the screen is because the screener is not looking at it correctly. So in their minds, they're thinking, oh, this person is doing great with their med management, and they're not considering the fact that there's somebody there 3 days a week setting up med boxes. They get another big one that I hear is people are independent with their meds, and then I find out they get bubble packs delivered daily. So the meds are all separated into the bubble packs for their 3 times a day. So that's 3 times a day of an intervention, and it's not being seen that way. So kind of rethinking some of those things and working through it. If there's a change in your screen lead, please let me know. I keep a very detailed list. Have folks are signed up for the listserv, the mental health substance abuse listserv? Okay. So I'll send that to you for folks to do that. I'm not as active on that as I probably should be, just because it's not my really cup of tea. But whenever there's like a new document, any kind of significant change in the screen, a memo that comes out that would influence anything with the screen, all of that stuff gets posted to the listserv. And anybody can be on that listserv. They don't have to even be a certified screener. If you want to get updates on the functional screen, you can sign up for that. You can also deactivate for that, because for some reason when people get registered and they sign up for a listserv, sometimes they will hit all of the different functional screens, and then we'll send something out about the mental health substance abuse functional screen, and I'll get all these emails back. I don't know why this is coming to me. I'm a long-term care screener. Well, they hit all the buttons when it came to registering for the listserv. So, but I mean, you can certainly do that if you want to see what the other ones are doing. But if there's a change with the screen lead, I just need to know, what's the agency, the person's name and contact information, all that kind of stuff, so I can keep it up to date in my records. Because if especially if something critical comes up, I'll probably send it more to the screen leads, especially if it's more sensitive in nature. I'll send it to the leads and not necessarily to the entire listserv. So I'll send it more directly. So. Communication is a good thing. And I believe, have all of your contact information because I got an Excel sheet with all of that. So we should be good to go there. So I think I've made it pretty clear I'm not a tech guru. Thankfully, we do have those. So the DHS SOS Help Desk is the folks to go to with any kind of technical issues. Because if you call me and say, my FSIA is frozen and I'm stuck on this page and it won't let me move past that, there's really nothing I can do with that at all. Like, that's just not my wheelhouse. So what I would do is bring them into it. So they also help with a lot of the structural components. So, when Milwaukee County changed from being SAIL and everybody was listed under that, and there was like 8,000 screeners all under one name, and it was impossible to separate which agencies were doing what. We worked with the DHS Help Desk to set up the structure of the super agency and the contract agencies and get that all pulled together. So they're able to do that. So, if you can't log in, freeze up. If the agency or screener's not listed, it's technology, it happens. And especially right now, so there's going to be some changes simply because of technology, and it's stuff that I never would have thought of before being in this role. But things like as you well know, I'm sure, we have antiquated computer systems at the state. It's just kind of old. And a lot of the structure of some of our data collection systems are built on Internet Explorer, say, 6, right? And now the rest of the world has moved on to like Internet Explorer 11. And Microsoft doesn't even have support. You can't even download updates anymore for 6. So there are issues where you might be stuck in this weird loop and you can't make stuff work. It's often because your version of Internet Explorer has holes in it in terms of technology and how that all works. So we might have to apply a patch or talk to your agency about getting a different, often a backwards version of Internet Explorer. This time of year always stinks for me because a lot of agencies use kind of whatever funding they have left over and they buy new computers, and they have Edge for a browser now instead of anything with Internet Explorer, and so that gets to be very complicated and weird, and so they will deal with all of that. You're always welcome to start with me even with the tech issue, but it'll go to them because I just don't know. They're also the ones who actually process the activation or deactivation of screeners. So while, once again, you're always welcome to send stuff to me, but I'm just going to turn around and send it to them. And the form has their fax number on it. So that's all kind of part of their role, is to make those changes. If you have a new agency that's starting up, that's going to be a new contract for Milwaukee County, and they'll be doing screening. There's actually a process for enrolling a new agency through them and everything like that. So DHS SOS help at dhs.wisconsin.gov. You're always welcome to call them as well. Scott and Teresa are kind of the two main people, and they're both very smart and have been working on these data systems for a very long time. So 9 times out of 10, whatever problem you're having, they've already solved with somebody else. So it could be a pretty quick fix. I also listed their fax number because that's, like I said, you have to scan or fax forms in for activation and deactivation. And we'll talk a little bit about some of those different components. So screen leads not only kind of serve in that mentoring role and working with new folks to the screen, but there's a couple of things that you're really kind of responsible for in general. So running a mental health AODA late screens report monthly would be great because there is a requirement for that. So I believe it calculates it by the month, not necessarily the day of the month. So if I had my screen on November 17th, I would be due in November of next year. So it does not need to be on the day for that update. But when you run a late screens report, and I showed you one of those earlier in the PowerPoint, it'll just give you kind of all the information for everything that's late, including the screener names, so that you can go talk to that screener and ask them to do that. So, and then following up with the appropriate screeners to ensure that they do the update. You are not personally responsible as a screen lead for that, but communicating with supervisors and management. So giving somebody a cue that you have a late screen, that's totally within your purview. Unless you're a supervisor, cracking down on somebody and making sure they get it done is probably not your role. But working with your supervisors to get them that information. You can run a report at least quarterly on the active screeners for your agency. You should be doing activation and deactivation as things come up, but you want to verify that every once in a while, make sure it actually went through. So you do a deactivation on somebody, and it somehow doesn't get through the system and they're still listed, we need to get up on that right away. So just kind of looking at it here and there, at least quarterly, making sure it's up to date, and then removing people as it happens with that deactivation process. Okay. The biggest risk to any kind of screen is that bias that we all carry within ourselves. And so one thing that I won't necessarily list as a responsibility for every screen, but it would be the best practice for screen leads, is to utilize opportunities to work through scenarios. Now, I will say some of the other screens where there's, a full-time staff of 3 serving in my 10% role for functional screens, they actually have yearly retesting that happens for every screen, or for every screener. They have questions that happen, I think it's monthly or quarterly, that every screen lead gets a copy of these questions to work through within their agency to see where their screeners come up, like what do they land on for an answer, and how does that rate with what's intended to be the answer to that scenario of how it would look in a screen. We have not done that with the mental health and substance use screen. I would like to say that I will anytime now, but the reality is it's a very small part of my role, and I would love to see that done, but right now I can't create that. But it can be created in each county or within each agency. So I know that you had brought up, Tamara, the idea at one point of coming up with, a question or two, at least quarterly, that you could send to each agency and have each of the screener teams kind of work through it and see, bounce off each other and come up with ideas and have a deeper conversation around what that would look like in a screen. So I would really encourage that. It's really best practice and will help that inter-rater reliability so that, once again, 5 people will come up with pretty much the same answer for the screen. Problem solving, but most importantly, I think, is encouraging screeners to discuss challenging situations because, there's a lot of complexity, and that's just how humans are. We're very complex people, and we don't fit neatly into boxes. So, how do we rely on each other to bounce things off of and really kind of explore in more depth how we would handle any certain situation? And I'm always happy to be helpful if I can be in those situations. And like I said, at some point, maybe I'll have more time in my life. Ha ha ha. We need IPS to stop expanding. And peer specialists to stop expanding. Another thing that would be best practice, but it's not a requirement of screen leads, is to randomly sample screens of folks who are screeners at your agency and go through that random sample one case at a time. And especially if you know the person, that's also helpful. But literally go through and look at, how did the screener answer the questions? What does that look like? How does that match with your or other involved parties' understanding of the person? Does it really accurately reflect what's going on with that individual? Are the notes accurate and detailed enough to where they're supporting the practice that CCS is providing that service? And really kind of going through that stuff in a random sample. Once again, it's not like you need to do it for every single screen that gets done, but I think if screeners know that things will be looked at like everybody else, they're more likely to be more accurate and thorough if they know that that's a possibility. One thing that the children's long-term care screen did when they had a full-time person just working on their screen is they would go to a county like Milwaukee County, and they would bring along a random sample of that county's screens, de-identified for the individual, but they would bring along, and they would actually work with the team at the agency or at the county level to make that screen better. So I thought that was really interesting. It would be very cool to do at some point. But, you know, pulling one from your agency and one from your agency, and then as a team, we give technical advice and suggestions on different ways to look at things and everything. So working to try to keep that inter-rater reliability. I mean, that's the biggest drift when it comes to the functional screen. We all get in our habits, and how do we kind of work against some of that, because that's just a reality. So, documentation. You need to have a release of information to get a screen from another provider. That's just a reality. So you do have the power as a screen lead to do a transfer, but you better make sure that you have the appropriate releases in place before you do that. You could also run transfers directly through me, and that's just fine. But I'm going to ask that you fax or email me a copy of that release of information as well. So you get that call from Fond du Lac County, we need all of so-and-so's treatment records, or we need their screen even. Because that sometimes happens kind of separate than the treatment records, and I think sometimes that release piece gets dropped because people don't think about the screen that way. But there does need to be an appropriate release of information on file prior to transferring a screen. Okay? The other thing is you need to verify that that new agency is actually accepting the transfer. So if somebody informs you they're moving to Fond du Lac County and they want to work with ABC Mental Health, and they sign a release at your place for that release, you could just transfer that screen, but if you haven't verified that that new agency is accepting that person as a client of their program, that's going to get really messy. So that is part of your responsibility prior to doing any kind of transfer, that you're verifying that that new agency is accepting that person and the responsibility for that screen. Otherwise, the screen gets kind of locked out in limbo land because you've let go of responsibility for it and they have not picked it up. So that can get a bit complicated, and then how we deal with it from the technical side of things can be a challenge. So you can transfer screens if you have all the right information. You have that release of information on file. I think I said this earlier, but I'll say it again. Release of information for treatment records does include the functional screen. You don't have to have a separate one for that. And that you'll verify that the new agency is accepting that screen, so, and be serving the person. So believe it or not, that is it in terms of slides. So that went faster than I was expecting. So feel free to contact me at any time, and screeners themselves are welcome to contact me. That's up to you guys in terms of how you structure your agency, whether you want them to go through you guys and then contact me, or they contact you and then you contact me. However you want to do it is completely fine with me. And then feedback. I am always interested in hearing feedback. I have not done a real functional screen in years. I've done lots of test examples, which is much easier. So as you guys are doing more and more of these, and as you're seeing how people are screening and seeing trends and everything, the more I hear about that, the more we can look at doing adjustments to the screen that will kind of correct for some of those issues, because it's not perfect. It's a screening tool. Yes, it's been validated, but it's been a while since it's been validated, and quite frankly, our systems have moved a long way in the last few years. It's pretty amazing in the last, especially 15 years, how much everything has changed, in my opinion, for the better, for sure. So if you're coming up with things, once again, If you're working with folks around substance use disorder and they're not screening positive for CCS, call me and let me know and we can look at it. One thing is Tamara mentioned that you guys are looking at starting to enroll youth in programs in CCS. So, silly little detail. You can use this screen on people as young as 16 if it's for the purposes of transition planning into the adult system, okay? It's not necessarily something that will be activated right now. It's more just to kind of take a look at, based on right now, are they likely to be eligible for services in the adult system? If you have a youth who has a CLTS screen in which they've screened positive for CCS, you do not need to do an adult screen the minute they turn 18. But the next screen after they're 18, you might want to use the adult mental health substance use disorder screen. That is not a hard and fast rule, though, and it depends on the young person. It depends on the systems. So that's got a lot of wiggle room in both directions, actually. So if you're serving young people, figure out a lot of, which screen's more appropriate. I mean, I don't know if you guys have used the children's screen. It's a lot more in-depth than this screen. There's a whole lot more behaviors and, different sections for different age groups. And this one's probably, 12 pages versus 30 pages. So it's a significant difference. So it might be more appropriate for a couple of years just to keep using that children's screen for a while, and that's okay. So I'm trying to think of any little other tips. Yeah.
Going all the way back to the beginning.
Yeah.
When we are doing the referral part of the screen, would we be entering as a contracted agency? Would we be entering where the referral came from originally when it went to Milwaukee County, or that we were getting it from Milwaukee County?
So the question is, when you get a referral, do you put as the primary referral source the original referral source, or when you get it from Milwaukee County, do you do Milwaukee County as the referral source? I would say that you would probably want to reflect, I would rather see you reflect the originating referral source because I think that gives us much more information over time. And if your structure is that pretty much everybody comes through Milwaukee County, we can presume that. But I think it means a lot in terms of looking at data in your county to find out that 80% of your referrals are coming from Winnebago versus the community. Other things like that can really kind of assist with that systems redesign, really taking a look at what's going on in our community and how can we make that better. I think the information would be more meaningful if you're reflecting the original referral source. Do you guys have an opinion on that, Tamara? Okay, you agree. You agree as well?
Yes.
Awesome. So, okay, we have agreement on that. Excellent. Are there any other questions? Because we have plenty of time. Just, try to be inclusive of that recovery message as you're doing the screen, even though we all acknowledge the purpose is to look at what's wrong. You, with your skills, can do that in a way that's honoring that strength base while still getting that same information. Really encourage you to use those collateral contacts and that information that you can get from records. Can be really helpful. If I look at a screen, I would say at least 35% is going to come from records of the information that you collect, 50% from the consumer, and then the rest of it would be kind of your clinical expertise and how you're working with folks. So it's that combination of different forms of expertise that makes this a more well-rounded. And if it was just your expertise as the screener or their expertise as the consumer of services or the referrals expertise, it really wouldn't reflect a whole person. So bringing together all the different forms of expertise and reflecting that in the screen would be best practice.
Code 1 stack, 53B boy. Code 1, 53B boy. Code 1, 53B boy.
There you go. Yeah.
I guess I have a question. I'm not sure if it would be more for you or for Tamara.
Okay.
So if we add a new user, since we're no longer going through Tamara, like Tamara, do you still want an email, or is it good enough by adding them on the ad form and sending to QA the completion?
So let me just repeat it a little bit for the recording purposes. So when an agency adds a new screener, or I would also say probably deactivates a screener, does the county want communication from the agency on those steps? So what do you guys say?
So right now, Tamara is holding the master list. So when an agency applies for a new staff person to be approved to do screening and assessment for CCS, our QA department can check Tamara's master list. Once the agency is holding the master list, our QA department will not be able to see that. So you would need to include your certificate as proof of training with QA. And that is how we would know that you had completed that. QA wouldn't approve the staff to do screening and assessment unless they have the proof. And then Tamara and I can see who is approved per QA. So you don't have to separately let us know that you have a new staff who is now approved to be a screener.
Okay.
We will find that out when QA verifies and approves.
So the QA process has their own kind of process of verifying everything before.
And in the past, they didn't need to see the certificate because
Okay.
they could check Tamara's spreadsheet. She saw the certificate, she vouched for it in
Okay.
the form of a spreadsheet.
So,
Now you will need to send your proof when you send your ad form.
okay. So in the past, Tamara got a copy of certificates and held a master list. Do we know what the date is for this changeover where each agency is going to be responsible for that? It's today?
No.
Okay. So you guys are all responsible for collecting that information and getting a copy to the county for the QA process. Okay. I would also highly recommend that you keep a copy of that training certificate in the person's personnel file as well. I mean, obviously you can't get access to the system without that documentation, but if we somehow don't have a copy of it 3 years from now and you need it for some reason, having it in your personnel file as well is a very good backup. If somebody changes names, contact us, because that does happen a lot. People change names. We have a process we can go through. You do not have to be retrained and then re-registered with a new WAMS ID. We can actually change the name within that system and keep that WAMS ID for that individual. And that's actually preferable for us so that we can look at history if we need to by screeners. So people's names change all the time, whether it's through marriage, other things like that. So just let us know and we can do those changes so that it's linked in the background so that all that history still follows that individual screener. Anything else? Yeah.
First of all, this was great information, and it explains some things that were confusing in the online training.
Oh, good.
My question is there any intention to update the online training that would include some of these more nuanced kind of technical pieces that would be really important to know
Yeah.
for screeners?
Yeah. So the question is, are we going to update the online training? I would like to do that, but it's very intimidating.
It's not a small one.
It's not a small project, but I do think it needs to be done. So what I'm trying to do at this point is collect information from screeners about what they would like to see different on the screen, review the administrative rules to see if there's significant changes in those rules over the next year or two, and then really do a full-scale project to do the updates on the actual screen while doing the updates to the training, because those two things have to be linked. or it doesn't work very well. And right now is a good time to do that because at the moment, as you'll see on your paper copy of the screen, we have the ICD-10 DSM-5 kind of after, but I think probably most of you know that is not a clean process. It's not like, oh, they just changed the code for this to something else. Some diagnoses have been completely dropped. Others have been shifted to a completely different category within the DSM-5. There's much more focus on trauma and trauma-based diagnoses, which I think needs to be reflected in the screen now. So there needs to be a full-scale project to really do a full update and revamp. The question is, we need to identify the expertise to do some of that. Like there's a lot that I can do, but what I'm not is a logic model person that can write algorithms. That's not me. You know, I'm pretty good clinically. I'm pretty good at building relationships. I'm pretty darn good at peer-based stuff. I am not an algorithm master. So we're going to need to really first identify what the major areas are that need some updating, work with the folks who know how to do that stuff, and then update the training around that. But yeah, I'd like to see that as well. And I love going out to counties. It gets me out of my cube. But I don't want to necessarily be doing the exact same training in every county of the state once a year. That would be a long process. So, yeah, and like I said, you have my contact information. If you're finding stuff that is just not working for you, please let me know. I'm actually considering, I guess in the old days, there used to actually be a functional screen lead statewide meeting that would bring all the functional screeners from all over the state together to identify major areas that need to be looked at from the bigger picture. I'd like to have that happen again. Not sure how that's going to all work out, but that's something I'd like to do because it's one thing if you can create great inter-rater reliability at your agency, but what does it look like then in your county? And then what does it look like in the state? So if your agency's doing great, that's fantastic. But if your inter-rater reliability is significantly different than your inter-rater reliability, we have some issues. And then we broaden that out statewide, and it gets really complicated. So I really, like I said, I really want to hear about issues people are having, updates. Obviously, there's some language updates that have to be made. But also, I think that there could be more depth to the substance use section. I think that that's really important as we're kind of really looking more at the dual recovery role and integrating. We are integrating peer specialists, we're integrating all this stuff, but right now it still feels to me like we have this mental health functional screen and then it's got this little box of substance use stuff. And I think that it's more important than that in terms of really looking at what's going on with the whole person. So, anything else? Yeah.
I'm sorry, this is a super basic question. This is like basically the whole purpose of the training, and I still feel like I don't get it.
Okay.
So can we just clarify what's different moving forward? What it was that Tamara did that we're now going to be doing moving forward? Because like when I look at the instructions on here, this little PowerPoint, this looks like everything that we've already done. So what am I missing as far as the stuff that you were doing that we now do?
So do you want to come up here so you can use the microphone to answer this question so it's recorded?
Sorry, I just feel really unprepared. And I know that we're going to have new staff.
Well, I know that the county staff were doing a lot of the initial screens, right? And then kind of moving them along to the agencies. And that BHD staff were holding the lists of the screeners and being responsible for activation and deactivation. And that's now going to be at the agency level.
But as far as registration, is there anything else that's different? Are we contacting anybody new or doing anything new? Or was it just that we were sending you the names?
I think we can talk about that.
Okay.
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 Specific to this situation.
Okay. Okay. So the question was, like, what's the major difference between then and now? And really, it's just that instead of one person at the county level being responsible, you guys are each responsible for your agency and running those reports and kind of checking in on things, making things are going forward. Still work with your county folks if there's any problems. Still work with your county folks if there's significant things that need to be happening within Milwaukee County that need to be looked at. If you guys, as kind of a collaborative, have some strong feedback about the screen, maybe work with the county to synthesize that and get it to DHS to take a look at that feedback and how we can do some changes in implementing that. That would be another area that could work pretty well. So, and honestly, I'm not all that familiar with how it was done. I know there's not a 20-year history of using the functional screen in Milwaukee County. So, and I don't know some of the things that might be happening into the future in terms of things like CSP using the functional screen. As we know, it's not part of the administrative rule for CSP, but most counties use the functional screen for CSP. Milwaukee's got their own decisions to make with that based on their needs and how they're structuring things, and that's fine. So, it's one of those things where our role is always to offer kind of best practice, and the county's role is to figure out how things are going to work within your community and your agencies. So that's not always something I can answer because that's a local decision. So, but it sounds like you two are going to chat afterwards about some of that. So, all right. So yeah, defaults are contact SOS for anything technical, contact me for anything clinical or for any unexpected results. By the way, anytime I am gone for work, which is very often, there will always be a backup person. So we have at least 2 staff at DHS in my division that back me up on the functional screen. And actually, we have 3 if you count my boss, Kenya Bright. So there's 3 other people if I'm not around and you need something answered right away. Cheryl Lofton, who's your CCS coordinator, is highly skilled in the functional screen and would be able to help out with most situations with that. Langston Hughes, who's the other CCS coordinator, he's one of my backup people. And then Ellie Jarvie, who used to manage a CSP in the northern area, now works down here with us, and she has a very long history of administering both the mental health functional screen as well as the children's functional screen. So she's another person that can really help you work through stuff if I'm not around. So when in doubt, ask. So, all right. Well, thanks, everybody. I'm so sorry we're ending early. The reality is this was really designed to be a half-day training, and then we added in some of the screen lead stuff, but it didn't take as long as I thought it might, so it'll work. All right, well, I look forward to hearing from you, and if you're seeing any disturbing trends, let me know and let Tamara know, and we'll work through it. So thank you. I appreciate it.